Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you ever wanted to bring your thoughts into reality, then do we have the Miracle Club show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mitch Horowitz, a leader in the New Thought movement, Penn Award-winning historian, the author of Occult America and One Simple Idea, and an upcoming book neither of us can wait to get their hands on, The Miracle Club. And that's just what I want to talk with him today, about how thoughts are causative and what in the world's our other self. That plus we'll talk about the shadow self, our plus entity, infinite intelligence, the magical story, an aquarium of weirdness, and what in the world Lisa Simpson and changing your outside has to do with anything. Gotcha. So welcome back to the show, Mitch. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, sir. Great to be with you. I'm so glad you're situated in your dream home now in Colorado, and I like the background.
Woohoo! On all accounts, and as I was saying beforehand, and we'll have to dive into this, this stuff works.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. We were standing only, we've been in the house, it's a mind bender to wrap our minds around it. And we weren't trying to play chicken with the universe. We had just a very strong sense, feeling, knowing it would work out. We only signed the lease on this place, I think, 3.5 weeks ago. And we moved our whole lives 2,000 miles across the country and set up shop. We had the moving truck, everything planned without even knowing where we were going, just knowing it would appear.
Right, right. You know, I think that you're absolutely correct. And one thing that people need to keep in mind is that sometimes when you fix a certain ideal in mind, you have to allow for a gestation period to pass. But when that gestation period does pass, things can unfold very rapidly and conform so closely to the vision that you were holding of your circumstances or of your physical surroundings that it's absolutely uncanny if you can retain the memory, if you can recollect what you were originally aiming for. I always tell people that I have things happening to me at age 52 that I dreamt of when I was 12 years old, literally. And that's a long gestation period. And there was a lot of twisting and turning roads before reaching this point. But if you take the time to actually peel back the layers of your memory, you can find truly uncanny correspondences between ideals that you held perhaps when you were very young and things that you've come into in middle age or at some other point in life. I'm not suggesting that the gestation period is always that long, but it's important to keep in mind that as in nature, there's a very different gestation period, say for an egg to give birth to a chicken, whereas there's a much longer gestation period for a horse or a human being. And if we look at the cycles of nature, we can see how some things happen according to very standard, regular, orderly seasons. But in other things, particularly in the areas of the gestation of life, there are vast, vast differences. Even though the cellular complexity of a chick and a horse is actually quite the same. They have digestive systems and central nervous systems and spines and so on. The gestation period is much longer. And it's worth looking to nature sometimes to remind ourselves that birth is not always going to take place in a uniform way. But when it does take place, if you can peel back the layers of memory and look upon something that you may have wanted earlier in life, the correspondences can truly be extraordinary. That's been my experience, at least.
Thank you, Mitch. And that it was brought to kind of head of a pin 2 days ago. I'm out for a mountain bike ride, just basically on the other side of the property. It's dumbfounding. Years ago, I said, I want to live someplace with trails out my back door. I had no idea that I could literally manifest trails out the back door. So I'm going down this mountain bike trail. And it's really steep, and it's like an old Jeep road, and I look up for just a fraction of a second. First off, I'm feeling this childlike joy because I haven't actually been on a mountain bike in a trail really in 20 years. I had parked it many years ago. I guess I got serious in life. I have no idea. It's like a remembrance to me. So I'm
Isn't that
back.
interesting?
I'm back
Yeah.
on the bike, and I look up for a brief second, and I'm looking across a valley at what looks like a village. Years ago, I used to watch on YouTube these, I don't even know what you call them. They would jump off of cliffs with squirrel suits on, basically. Humans who would fly on the edge of cliffs,
Uh-huh.
somewhere between base jumping and flying. Um, and they would always be like doing it in Norway with these amazing mountain villages in the
Right,
distance.
right.
And I looked up for a brief second on the mountain bike, and I was looking at one of those villages.
Oh, no kidding.
And I go,
Yeah, yeah.
how in the world? So it's what you said. I planted a seed a very long time ago, left it, but that seed, I call it casting a stone of attention in the pond of intention. The waves had already been, the stone had been cast, the waves were going out.
And let me add something else to this. There's a very famous expression that circulates through our culture: be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. I tried to track down the etymology of that phrase. Where did it come from? Because it's a very interesting statement on life, and it touches indirectly on some of the principles we're talking about, and it's also a cautionary phrase. What I discovered was that that phrase was popularized in the mid-19th century by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was actually paraphrasing the philosopher Goethe. And what Goethe actually said was this. Goethe said that what we wish for when we are young comes upon us in waves when we are old. So be careful. Those were Goethe's words. And then Emerson quoted Goethe and popularized this expression about being careful what one wishes for. But he was talking about the correspondence between youth and old age. And then eventually the phrase itself became popularized into the form that we know it today. But think about Goethe's original observation. What we wish for when we're young comes upon us in heaps, in waves, when we're old. So be careful, be careful. There are a lot of layers in that. We tend to forget what we wish for when we're young. We tend sometimes to reject what we wish for when we're young because as we age, we may be either forgetful of or embarrassed by our youthful wishes. Sometimes, as I often say, there are things in ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge. Sometimes we wish for things that we might think, for example, seem crass or materialistic or aggressive or don't cast us in a good light, even within the innards of our own house of mirrors within. And we want to gaze into those mirrors and see back a figure that we've become habituated to thinking we are. But sometimes you have to shatter that mirror and shatter that habituation and embrace something that you may really wish for or that you may have wished for when you were young, that for whatever reason you've shunted away. And I try to talk to people about that quite freely because some of us who consider ourselves spiritual, for example, might have all kinds of materialistic wants and needs and desires, and they might be very legitimate. Others who are climbing the corporate ladder might prefer to be leading a more quiet life at home, might not want to be dealing with the frictions and the confrontations that come with corporate life. Or you could be in just the right place. You know, I'm not suggesting that there's always some mirror opposite to what you're currently doing, but it's so valuable to sit with an observation like Goethe's, popularized by Emerson, and ask yourself, what did I wish for when I was young? Was I careful? Has it come upon me? Or have I shunted it to some narrow corner and forgotten about it because I didn't think it was attractive or I didn't think it was properly spiritual or I didn't think it was practical? There are correspondences in life that can be so sharp and so uncanny in their exactitude in terms of thought and experience. But we forget them. We're very, very forgetful. Sometimes we push away things. So it's worth sitting with that observation like Goethe's and thinking back to whether in fact there really is a dramatic correspondence between what we're living out now as adults, and what we wished for when we were very young.
I think I'm about to cry here because if I go back to my kid riding around the block, oh my God, is this the wildest, craziest, beautiful dream?
Yeah,
You do forget that. If we go back in your story, because you're one of the leaders in the New Thought movement, but you haven't always been. You had to shatter the habituation. You had to literally.
that's right.
How did you
Absolutely.
uncreate
Without
yourself?
question. Wow, that's a very interesting question. For a long time, I had pushed down the idea of being a writer. When I graduated from college, I did work as a journalist, but I was unhappy with it. I left journalism, I went into publishing, and after a period of time in publishing, I had lost my taste and lost my way for trying to break through as a writer. I didn't even know what I wanted to write about. I knew I didn't want to be another guy bopping around New York City writing book reviews for the Village Voice or something like that. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be in the role of critic, and I didn't feel like anything that I had to express from a political perspective was so rarefied that somebody else couldn't do it. And I didn't have a sense, even if I were to throw myself back into writing, of what I wanted to write about. And I really allowed myself to move away from that desire, to move away from that passion. And I always felt an uneasiness about it. I always felt a sense of dissatisfaction. But my career was going reasonably well, and my life was busy on many fronts. I was certainly attached to the world of letters, and it was easy, in a certain sense, to turn away from the thing that I was most passionate about in favor of some consolation prize, some secondary achievement, which was working on other people's writing. And and this dissatisfaction, I guess, found an avenue of escape when, in the summer of 2003, a story I've told before to your listeners, friends of mine who were publishing Science of Mind magazine asked me to interview the Major League Baseball pitcher Barry Zito, who at the time was pitching for the Oakland A's. And Barry was using all the metaphysical methods that you discuss on your show as a central part of his training regimen. And I decided I would take that interview as a opportunity to really stretch myself as far as I could go, to write the kind of profile of Barry that was more than just a Q&A with a few pieces of connective tissue, but that really had a point of view, that really was written from the peak of my abilities at the time. And I was so satisfied with it, and I was so happy with it. And after the piece was published, I heard from Barry's father, who growled at me over the phone, "Mitch, you stick with this thing." And I had never known the man, but he had this sense that there was something in this piece that I was reaching for. And I knew at that time that I had found my subject matter. I wanted to document metaphysical experience, both in history and in practice. And that piece came out in fall of 2003. And by fall of 2006, I had put together a very, very substantial proposal for my first book, Occult America, which came out a couple of years later. So it was really 3 years time from having walked away from writing to producing this piece about Barry Zito, which is called Barry's Way. You can find it online. Within 3 years of the publication of that piece, I had crafted a really solid and substantial proposal for my first book, and had an offer from Random House. 3 years, 3 years. And that was after an adult stretch of gosh, maybe 15 years or so of having pushed off and forgotten about writing. So the flame that had burned in me to be a writer had gotten very, very dim. It wasn't even a bonfire. It was just a tiny little pilot light that I had forgotten about. And I threw myself back in it in my late 30s at a time when we really do begin to settle into whatever the pattern of our life is going to be. And it turned things around. It turned things around. There was also a second phase, which is really what I'm in right now, which is that I went from being somebody who wrote as a historian of alternative spirituality to being somebody who wrote about experience and wrote about practical application and wrote from a perspective of practical philosophy, which is what I'm doing right now. So that's the theme of the book that I have coming out in the month of October, The Miracle Club. The Miracle Club is the most hands-on, practical, application-driven book I've ever worked on. And it was something that I'm not sure I could have written 5 years ago. So I've continued on that path. Yesterday, actually, a dear friend of mine, Christina Reinwald, who owns a hair salon in Brooklyn, and I write about her in my book, The Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim.
This is the one who works on kids and you.
That's right. I'm the one adult customer. I'm emotionally a kid, so they permit me to come in. And so Christina was cutting my hair yesterday in Brooklyn, and she paused. We were having a conversation, and she said to me, would you consider yourself an occult philosopher? And I said, wow, that's a really interesting question, because that's exactly the direction in which I feel I've been moving. You know, if someone doesn't like the term occult, that's a term I'm very comfortable with, but substitute another one in, say metaphysical, you know, use a different term. I think they all converge, but use a different term if you wish. But that's exactly the direction in which I'm heading. I've spent years developing myself as a historian of alternative spirituality, and now I'm writing more in the direction of practical philosophy. But I've also kept my feet planted in both worlds. For example, several weeks ago, I was presenting at an academic conference at Rice University on mysticism and America. And I've just completed a scholarly paper which is being published by the academic publisher Brill as part of a collection on mysticism and modern America. So I've kept my foot in the world of historical study, and I've also planted a foot in the world of practical philosophy, and that's been very satisfying to me. So there's been a second remaking, in a sense, which reflects the phase I'm in right now.
How did and I can see that coming for us, where it's interesting that you say 3 years. We're less than 3 years into the show. We're almost 900 shows in.
Wow.
It's kind
900 shows is amazing.
Thank
when
you.
you hit 1,000, that just feels like some kind of a unique landmark.
Yeah, well, I will look at what the approximate date of what that will be. Because that'll come up actually rather quickly. And there's definitely, we're writing now, and we're feeling more of the urge to share as well as you are, rather than just to share others' words. What was the impetus? What was was it a tsunami of energy that said, Mitch, it's time to shift now?
You know, I think it was a quiet, constant radiation from within telling me I wasn't fully doing what I should be doing. And at some point, that radiation met with opportunity. You know, it was funny. I was very touched by something in a movie that you and some of your listeners might remember. It was a dark comedy starring Johnny Depp called Ed Wood, about the great horror movie director. I mean, it's funny to refer to Ed Wood as a great director, because during his lifetime, he was considered the ultimate hack, and nobody heard of him. And if he was known at all, he was known for producing ultra low budget horror movies that later on got awards for being the worst movies ever made, like Plan 9 from Outer Space. And in this brilliant, brilliant black comedy about Ed Wood, in which Johnny Depp played the figure of Ed Wood, this movie must have come out about 12, 15 years ago. There's a dramatized scene. I don't think anything like this ever really happened. Some version of it, maybe, but not to my awareness. There was a dramatized scene in which Ed, the director, storms off a movie set, dejected and upset, and he also happens to be wearing women's clothing because Ed was a cross-dresser among his many other identities. And so Johnny Depp, playing Ed Wood, is in a bar, dejectedly knocking back whiskey, dressed in women's clothing. And he sees his hero, Orson Welles, seated at a table back in a corner. And he goes up to him and he introduces himself. And he says to him, and I think this is all just imaginary, but he says to him, Orson, is any of this worth it? Is any of it worth it? And the Orson Welles character says to him, Ed, of course it is. Why spend your life working on other people's dreams? So the fictional Orson Welles says, why spend your life working on other people's dreams? Now, anybody who's curious can find that clip on YouTube. I encourage you to watch the whole movie, but if you don't feel like watching the whole movie or you haven't got time, go to YouTube and type in Orson Welles Ed Wood. You'll find that scene. And that line, even though it was dramatized, was a parable of complete truth. And it struck me watching that movie that I was spending my life working on other people's dreams, other people's words. And to be perfectly frank with you, sometimes those dreams and those words weren't crafted with the rigor or with the dedication that I thought they should be. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people I encountered when I was an editor and publisher who would be given an extraordinary opportunity to write a book, to pursue their art, to pursue their passion. They'd be paid for it. They'd be paid well for it. Sometimes they'd be paid on time. They had a reliable media company at their back, and they would turn things in sloppily. They would turn things in late. They would, at times, not turn things in at all. So not only was I in a position where I was working on other people's dreams, but those dreams were not even very finely wrought sometimes. Those dreams were not even very finely crafted sometimes. It was almost like I was pulling people over a finish line sometimes. And I'm sure lots of your listeners have had this experience in their lives where they're pushing and pulling people to do things and to fulfill opportunities that are in fact wonderful privileges if they're understood properly. So for me, although publishing was very good to me in many, many, many ways, I was working on other people's dreams, and at times I was working harder on their dreams than they were themselves. And so this was quietly radiating within me. And I think it was energy that was looking for an outlet. And when that outlet arrived in the form of this interview, an article, the profile that I wrote about Barry Zito, that's when I knew that I could actually concretize this energy into real projects in the world. And that has built and built and built. So I don't know if there was any one moment that was a catalyst or an ignition point, but I do know that the energy was there. I do know that when I encountered that scene in the movie Ed Wood, I felt like it was speaking to me personally. I'm sure there are other people who have felt that as well. And I guess it was just a matter of time for that outlet to arrive. And when it arrived, I knew it. It felt very natural. It felt very real. And I thought, this opportunity is going to be taken in full.
Woohoo! If we go back to be careful what you wish for, and you mentioned about even childhood, there's an element of people feeling like helplessness of, oh God, what did I wish for then? Because now what's going to happen? But is there also an element of maybe we want to go back and revisit who we were at that time to see what we time stamped in ourselves that was of importance that we may have lost helping fulfill other people's dreams?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question, and I addressed that in the book, The Miracle Club, actually, towards the end of the book. One of the things that I propose in that book is that something that we often treat as an idle fantasy can be very powerful and very real. And that is entertaining this idea, what would I say to my younger self if I had the
Yes.
opportunity? And we often fantasize about that. And we often ask ourselves, what would I say? What would I tell my younger self? And we dismiss it as a fantasy. And I say, wait a minute, wait a minute. Tread very, very carefully here, because it may not be a fantasy after all. Now, I won't go through all the detail and all the metaphysics and theorizing here. I do some of that in the book. But if we were to suspend the assumption for a moment that time is linear, it begs all kinds of interesting questions. And I think anybody working in quantum theory and in any kind of physical mechanics would say that there are good grounds for, at times, suspending the conviction that time is this linear point A to point B structure. That might be illusory. And we have good reason to think that might be illusory because we see all kinds of things happening in particle experiments, for example, that defy ordinary time. Outcomes change based on the decision to observe, not observe, the method of observation. Objects affect one another at vastly great distances for reasons that we're not currently able to ascertain. There's all kinds of things that we see going on within the vast reaches of space, within the microcosms of the particle world that define conventional mechanics. And if we get into questions of the existence of other dimensions or infinite outcomes or the possibilities of parallel or unseen expressions of reality that evince pulls on our own world, it starts to beg questions about how time and space function. We already know from Einstein's theories, for example, that time correlates to speed and time can actually literally slow down. So that in itself, which we've known at this point for 80 years, that in itself tells us that our assumptions about time as this objective freestanding thing don't stand up under intense scrutiny and don't cover all the cases of reality. We know that, and we've known it for 80 years. So let's say that linearity is an illusion. Let's say linearity is just something that we use based on our limited sensory capacity to organize our way through life. I know I'm supposed to speak to Michael at such and such a time EST. Michael is in a different time zone. We'll synchronize our watches. We'll figure it out, and we'll agree to agree on linearity. Okay. So let's say linearity is just an organizational tool, and it's not really what's going on, or it's not all of what's going on. It is possible based on everything I've just been discussing, that all of time is happening simultaneously, and we are selecting different outcomes based upon the nature of our observation, based upon the decision to observe at a certain time or in a certain way. If it's possible that all time is playing out at once, that everything is happening now, and there's an infinitude of outcomes that we are selecting among, how do we know that it's just a mental exercise, that it's just a fantasy or an illusion? To say, what would I tell my younger self if I could go back?
Yes.
What if there is no back? What if back is just another one of these linear tools that we use just to organize our sock drawer, so to speak? So there's no going back. It's all happening right now. So what you decide to tell your younger self could actually be enormously, enormously consequential. And this brings us back to Goethe's observation. Be careful, because it's very tempting to say, what would I undo from my past, for example? Well, most people want to undo some tragedy or some difficulty they went through, and that's understandable. We all have things that we look back on with remorse or with anger or with regret. However, of course, some of the episodes in our life that we would describe as most traumatic were also aiding and abetting our own process of maturation.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be things that we really think are great strengths in ourselves that we wouldn't possess today if it weren't for some earlier difficulty. In fact, there may be great strengths that we have that wouldn't be there at all if it weren't for some chronic difficulty. People who suffer from anxiety or people who suffer from depression may also be uniquely sensitive people, uniquely empathetic people. I don't know a single forgive me, I'm being glib, but I don't know a single artist who had a happy childhood. David Lynch claims he had a happy childhood, so I'll have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But aside from David, I don't know. People tend to internalize pain in different ways. Sometimes it's disabling, and sometimes it's enabling of new traits and maturity. If an individual suffers from something difficult in childhood or suffers from a chronic emotional strain, that may be the axis around which they also constructed a lot of formidable behaviors, a lot of strength, a lot of maturity, or a lot of sensitivity. So this is why Goethe warned us to be careful. And maybe Goethe had a sense of this inexactitude of time. Maybe Goethe wasn't just talking in some literal, linear way about what you wished when you were 4 years old, but maybe what you wished when you were 4 years old is going on right now, and maybe it can be changed, and maybe you can go and maybe you can dispense advice or guidance to a younger self, and it actually could be very concrete and actionable and practical and real. Be careful, because there could be things that it might seem appealing to avert, but those same things helped you tremendously. We can all track down circumstances in our lives in which we didn't get something that we really wanted, and we can see how fortunate we were not to have gotten that thing, or vice versa, where we got our dream job and it turned out to be awful. And there's unexpected consequences stemming from every event, and there's strengths that stem from every weakness. It almost seems to be a bargain that life gives us to do with what we wish. So we have to be very careful about going back and giving advice to our younger selves, so to speak. I'm saying going back again, sort of adopting the language of linearity. But what if it's all happening right now? I do believe we have the gift of some perspective at our most sensitive moments. I don't think we're completely without devices, because then there would be a certain fatalism in all this. The caution is not meant to be a fatalism. It's not meant to say, well, gee, since we lack perspective, we just can't do anything, then drift along. I do think at our finest moments as mature men and women, we have experiences of perspective, even if it's fleeting. So I don't try to dodge the question either. And in the Miracle Club, I go back and I do talk about things that I have counseled my younger self on and that I think stand up to scrutiny. And because I think that while caution is necessary, we can't be overly cautious to the point where we just become inert. And we're going to act anyway, whether by drift or by wish. So act by wish. But take it very, very seriously. If you, and I address this to your listeners, if you want to experiment with this idea of going back and talking to your younger self, let the consequence of that weigh heavily on you. Be very serious about it, because what you're doing could be an actual exercise in reality shaping. It's not to be taken lightly. And yet, you should feel a certain joy over this, because you can also sit down in a room or in a favorite spot, enter into a kind of relaxing isolation, and ask yourself in a serious, sustained, mature way, what would I really like to see through? What would I really like to carry out? What would I really tell myself? And have Goethe as your guide. Be careful. Be careful. Take seriously this possibility. It could be extraordinary, and it could be consequential. So these are the kinds of things I'm personally experimenting with today. Some of these things that we're apt to take lightly, or that have been kind of popularized into these familiar expressions, might have behind them a much deeper and more greater and more powerful reality. And that is ours to experiment with. And that's what I mean about joining the Miracle Club. The Miracle Club has its roots in history. It was an occult salon that met in New York City in the 1870s. But what I love about them was their spirit of experimentation. And that's what I'm trying to revive today. That's what I invite everybody to join in on, to join me in.
Woohoo! It's one of my favorite, I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, I'll go with favorite coaching tools, is to have people going for walks with their younger selves
Yeah,
and having talks with them. And one of the things in particular I want them to know is they've got their back, and that they're willing to listen to their
yeah,
younger self, because the younger self often doesn't feel heard. The younger self came with this passion, with this fire, with this excitement, and it's going, hello, 30, 40, 50-year-old self, don't you remember?
yeah, that's right. That's right. And for me, the joy of what I'm doing today, people always ask me how I have the energy to do all the stuff that I'm doing. I never for a moment take for granted the privilege of doing this stuff, because it does comport with wishes I had when I was very young. And when you find yourself in middle age and you're able to do stuff that you dreamt of when you were young, you never take it for granted. That's the trouble with reaching your peak when you're very young. I think that's why we see a lot of really wonderful artists who past 30 seem adrift. Peaking when you're young can be a tremendous challenge. It can be thrilling and it can be wonderful, but it can almost feel like a birthright. When you peak in middle age, it feels like a privilege. And for me, at least just speaking personally, that fuels a lot of energy. Everybody says, do you sleep? And well, the answer is actually very little. I am a walking experiment in sleep deprivation. But is that so terrible? Is that so terrible? I mean, I'm being glib. I do catch up on sleep on the weekends and so forth. And obviously, I take seriously the need to take care of one's health. I don't
Yes.
mean to run that down in any way. But
You're having fun.
I'm having fun. And when you discover these opportunities at a later point in your life, at least in my experience, you take them as a privilege and you go at them with a complete gusto. It unleashes a great deal of energy.
Woohoo! So you talk about many experiments in your book to come the Miracle Club. Is there one experiment we can begin working with? Because there are so many people who are listening who are saying, Mitch, that's great. Michael, that's great. I'm trapped in whatever. I have no idea
Yeah,
either how to get out or where in the world I'd want to go.
right. I totally hear you. I totally hear you. Feeling trapped and really feeling stuck can be a draining, extremely difficult experience. And I would never venture to give anybody a light or God forbid a vapid answer
Mhm.
that was designed to meet all people where they live. But I would say this, and I really truly do believe this in my heart. There are certain things that you can do immediately, right away, if you feel in a truly trapped situation. And I offer these up, and I offer these up in great seriousness, because they're going to sound simple, and they are simple, but we neglect these kinds of things all the time. And if we can throw ourselves into them with passion, and each one of them I think is available to every single individual instantly. If we can throw ourselves into them with passion, there will be results. Positive things will come out of our effort. I'm going to offer 3 steps, 3 possibilities.
Sure.
Step 1, discontinue gossip. Stop gossiping, rumor mongering, talebearing. Stop listening to gossip, rumors, stories about other people. So much of our conversation and so much of our interaction over social media is steeped in gossip, steeped in passing along stories that are designed to humiliate other people, put down other people, take pleasure from other people's embarrassment or what have you. It doesn't mean disassociating yourself from politics or social issues or anything like that. But I'm saying when you're sort of getting into the dirt of other people's lives, I'm speaking particularly of private people, people you know, people in your office, people in your building. But you can interpret this, you can extend this to the lives of celebrities too. Again, if things have political or social implications, I'm not suggesting you should detach yourself from the world. But I'm saying that gossiping, spreading rumors, talebearing, it's an absolute poison. And if you desist from it, you will come into a greater nobility of character. I absolutely promise you, you will come into a greater nobility of character. People will see you more as a leader. You will feel better about yourself. You will feel more energy. You will sleep better. Gossip and rumor are the equivalent of a fog that chokes us off from our finest energies, our best character traits, and in many cases, actually our best intellectual and emotional abilities. It's a sinkhole. And very often when we engage in gossip and rumor, we're spreading things that are either not true, half true, or are mitigated by a whole world of circumstances about which we know nothing. I would be willing to bet that most people listening have had the experience of going to lunch with somebody, for example, and over that lunch, engaging in all kinds of gossip and stories about people at work or people in your family or whatever, and you feel a terribly depleted energy afterward, and you ignore that depletion by having a coffee or having another Coke or something like that. Do not ignore that depletion, or do not think you're imagining it. You are not imagining it. It is real. There's a quality by which the things that we say about other people have almost this auto-suggestive quality of rebounding in our own experience and the content of our lives. And I think we feel it as a real palpable depletion of ethics, energy, creativity, intellectual and emotional acumen. The best and quickest thing you could do to improve your life, and you will feel the benefits right away, is stop gossiping. It's that simple. And don't get into the weeds of what is gossip, what isn't gossip. Does this mean I can't say bad things about, such and such politician anymore? Forget about the weeds. Just act on it. Just act on it. We know what gossip is in the same way that we know what touching a hot stove is. It's as detrimental to your life in the long run as something physically depleting, and you will come into a greater nobility, strength, and sense of self if you desist from gossiping and you move away from those relationships that are steeped in gossiping. That's one. No matter what we say, or no matter what qualifications we try to bring to the matter, everybody can truly act on that right now. And I understand that people are scared to act on it because they think, my God, what else will I talk about? I'll be boring. I won't be seen as a source of information anymore. I won't be seen as valuable. I can tell you from personal experience, you may feel that at first, but those feelings will go away, and you will not be boring, and you will not be devalued, and you will no longer have to worry that your valuation is based on your ability to dish dirt. I used to have the same worries. All that stuff will go away, and it'll go away fairly quickly. So that's one thing that everybody can do. And I would take it very seriously. Another thing that you can do is try as best you possibly can to move away from destructive relationships, relationships in which you feel bullied, pushed around, put down, minimized. You might be in a situation either at work or at home or with a relative where you are unable to gain physical separation from another person who's causing you pain, and that is very serious. But something you can do is make an internal vow to yourself that I am going to do everything within my power with unflagging effort. And if I fail, I will keep returning back to my ideal to distance myself within from someone who is causing me pain, and I will get away from that person at the first possible opportunity physically. If that opportunity doesn't come for a year or more than a year, so be it. The great, great abolitionist hero, Frederick Douglass, wrote of a famous episode in his life in all three of his memoirs. I read about this in my book, Occult America.
Yeah.
Douglass, who spent his young life as a slave in the most horrific conditions, was being tormented at age 15 by a particularly cruel slave master in the state of Maryland, where Douglass was imprisoned. And Douglass talked about making the decision one day at age 15, and there's sort of an occult backdrop to this story, which I write about in Occult America. He made a decision at age 15 to physically stand up to this slave master, and they struggled for a time, and the slave master couldn't get the better of Douglass, and Douglass made the decision at that moment of his life that he would never again be tormented by this man. He would never again be in servitude to this man. He would never again feel any kind of inner fealty to this man, even though he was still enslaved in fact. And he would, at the first possible opportunity, be free physically, in as much as he had just vowed to be free innerly. And again, one doesn't need to get lost in the details of this profound and important narrative. It's not necessarily about standing up to somebody physically, but what Douglass had gone through as a 15-year-old boy was an experience of what he described as this inner revolution. In his terms, he felt a sense of inner freedom that he knew would eventually express itself in outer freedom. He knew as soon as he had made that determination within, there would be a time and place where that determination would be seen through without. So this is number two. I would suggest to a person in crisis, try in every way possible to make the determination, and write it down if that helps you, that you are going to be innerly free from somebody who is misserving you, and that this inner freedom will be the prelude to physically separating yourself from that person eventually and in time. And read Frederick Douglass's memoirs. You can find them online. You can find them at any public library. You can find inexpensive editions. He tells the same story, this wonderful, extraordinary internal revolution that he experienced at age 15. You can't go wrong. In each of Douglass's memoirs, he repeats this story. It was the pivot point of his life. It was the ignition of his ethical development. Read it. Read how this great mind, this great spirit talks about it, and make your own inner vow in your own way, based on your own personal circumstances, to get away from somebody who is bullying you or degrading you or detracting from your ability to reach your potential. Let it be the prelude to getting away from them physically. Again, this is something that we can all do because it is an inner action. And the third and final thing that I would say is, the mind is extraordinarily supple and open to suggestion in the few moments before we go to sleep at night. There are various reasons for that, which I go into in the Miracle Club, but suffice to say use those precious few moments to recite an affirmation, to make a declaration about yourself. What is missing in your life? What do you want in your life? Do you need to be more strong in your relationships? Do you need to be more determined in completing your degree or in doing something that's vitally necessary for you out in the world? Use those precious few moments just before you fall asleep at night to silently recite an affirmation to yourself. We disdain simple things because we think they sound familiar, and they sound too familiar to work, we often tell ourselves. Don't overlook what's so simple. Taking advantage of those few moments before you go to sleep at night to regularly recite an affirmation, and do so for weeks. Do so for weeks. You may find that there is a unique and surprising power to be tapped into by affirming, visualizing, or praying in those precious, precious few moments of relaxation before you go to sleep at night. That is prime time for self-suggestion and something more, and something more. There are a wide range of sleep experiments and psychical experiments that demonstrate the mind's unique abilities and aptitudes and suggestibility at that time. So use that precious time before falling asleep at night to recite affirmations. So again, the three steps are these. Very simple. Stop gossiping. Mm-hmm. That's one. Two is make an internal vow to yourself and stick to it to get away from somebody who is being deeply disruptive into your life. Let it serve as a prelude to a time when you can physically get away from that person. And three, use the few moments before you drift to sleep at night. It's a period of time that sleep researchers call the hypnagogic state. It's a time of great suggestibility. Use that time to recite affirmations, to enact a visualization, or to use a prayer. That can be a time of tremendous and powerful self-suggestion. So those are three things I would offer to a person in crisis. No candy coating, nothing that I think is pithy or that I think is just kind of a recitation of a slogan. These are three concrete, actual steps that I believe your listeners can act on literally today in their car, at work, at home.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Mitch. Going back to a line that you made in suggestion number one, it seems so important, and I think it can be such a massive energy shift. What's the importance of looking at and shifting in any way, and maybe you can suggest other ways, nobility of character?
Yeah. I think we walk around feeling disappointed in ourselves, and that's the primary source of suffering in our lives. There's always going to be stuff happening to us, good and bad. And I think when, for example, somebody says or does something that's hurtful, very often we're less affected by the action of the other person than by the imperfection of our own response. Mm-hmm. We often review these events over and over in our minds with a sense of disappointment over what I should have said, what I should have done. And the truth is, our emotions work faster than our minds. So we get angry or flustered or afraid more quickly than we formulate an appropriate response in our intellectual apparatus. So it's pretty tough to expect of oneself a clever rejoinder or an answer to an insult or a subtle put down or something like that, because the emotions gallop while the intellect walks. However, we're less likely to become victim to episodes like that if we're already walking around with a precondition of self-respect, a precondition of sensing our own nobility and intrinsic worth and capacity. And a person who stops gossiping will have good reason for believing in his or her own nobility. It won't just be a fantasy or a put on or Stuart Smalley sitting in front of his mirror saying, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough. We all laugh at Stuart because we see he's an insecure guy trying to persuade himself of something. You won't have to persuade yourself of something because you'll know that when you stop gossiping, for example, You've done something that is befitting of a noble person. You won't be telling yourself, I'm this. You'll be it.
Woohoo! You have a brilliant book um, um, about your chief aim.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can share, before we start to wrap things up here, one way that people can start to find their deliberate chief aim.
Yeah. Um, I'm a very strong believer that selecting a definite aim in life is a very powerful thing because it serves to channel your energies. And it can channel your energies in such a way that you will realize abilities and strengths and agencies in yourself that you never thought you possessed. And I speak from personal experience. Until I had a sense of my aim as a chronicler of metaphysical experience, I didn't feel I could throw myself into tasks the way that I have. My wife has made the observation that I've become much faster as a writer, and yet at the same time, I think my output is of substance and is of high quality. Things are transpiring in a way that unfolds quickly, but that produces works, I think, of substance. And those energies wouldn't have been tapped if I didn't have a definite chief aim. So I'm a very strong proponent of that. I do think that getting out an old fashioned paper and pencil and making lists of what you really, really want to do in life and making these lists, writing down things that interest you, writing down what you want in life, and really sticking with it in a sustained, mature, serious way for weeks, perhaps, and making the determination of where all that goes, What is it really, truly directing you towards? And if you were to remove all sense of inner inhibition and propriety and all sense of how you're supposed to look to yourself, how you're supposed to look to other people, just as an exquisitely private exercise, working with your list, working with your own sense of inner passion and desire. What would you really like to be doing with your life, even if you think you can't act on it? Even if you think you can't act on it. The point is to go about this exercise with intimacy, with privacy. You don't have to talk to anybody else about what you're doing. And in fact, it's probably better not to, because you don't want to ask yourself, what will look good to other people? What will look good to me? Without any embarrassment, without any inhibition. You want to carve out and reserve a space to yourself where you really, really go at the question of what is my one definite chief aim in life? And don't allow your attention to be distracted, to be taken away by the idea of, well, gee, there's lots of things that I want to do in life. My contention is that life gives us a kind of tough but extraordinary bargain. And this ties into everything we've been talking about this hour, which is that the one thing that we want more than anything else in the world, barring some extraordinary countervailing event or phenomenon or accident of geography, barring some extraordinary countervailing event, we tend to get that one thing that we want more than anything else. And I would say, before dismissing that, scrutinize your life, Go back over everything we've talked about. Goethe's suggestion that what we wish for in youth comes to us in waves when we're old. The idea that linearity might be just an illusion that we use to get through the day, so to speak. The idea that everything might be happening at once. The idea that, in fact, our memories are flawed. We forget about or turn away from desires that we thought were either impractical or embarrassing or unnecessary in some way. My contention is that we are dealt a tough bargain in life, which is that we very often get that one thing that we want more than anything else, in part because it channels knowingly or not. It channels our emotions, our energies, our intellectual acumen, all in one direction. So what is it? What is it? It can seem very difficult to people because, again, we feel the need to wear many hats, and life does require us to wear many hats. But one well-chosen aim can cover a lot of bases, which is why it's so important that your definite chief aim not only be very real and concrete and actionable, but if it's very sincerely arrived at, it might cover a lot of different bases in your life. So you'll be able to wear the hats that are demanded of us. But don't treat it passively. Don't approach it apathetically. Really throw yourself into it. And the process should be and can be one of very deep individual experimentation. Experimentation that you conduct entirely on your own. Experimentation that you don't ask somebody else to vet or to approve or use other people as a sounding board. There are times not to use other people as a sounding board. This is an invitation to go very deep within and ask yourself, what do I, as a mature being, filled with passions and needs and wishes, filled with a sense of personal aspiration, what do I want? What's the one thing? What's the one thing?
Woohoo! Bringing it full circle here, real briefly, we got to let you go here, but for parents, for their kids who can actually speak with the kids now in that present moment to plant seeds for their future, what do you suggest?
That's a tough question because I'm a father of two kids, ages 11 and 13, and I'm reminded of something that's attributed to Napoleon. I don't know if he really said it. Every plan immediately fails upon contact with the enemy. So,
Oh, no.
all my ideals and everything that I decide I'm going to, bring into my children's lives, I'm not sure they're stronger than I am, and they rebel against me. I'd like to think they pick things up. I certainly would like to think they pick things up, but as any parent, I think would attest, your best laid plans turn into chaos when you're faced with the actual stresses and the emotional putback that parenting puts us all into as a situation. So I don't want any parents out there to feel like, wait a minute, Mitch is going Disneyland on us. It's tough. It's tough. I think that probably whatever my kids pick up from what you and I have been discussing comes by way of osmosis. I think they're instilled with the idea that prayer is there as an option for them, that mind metaphysics, everything you and I have been talking about, is there as an option for them, that wisdom literature is there as an option for them. When they were a little younger, I would read passages every night to them from the Jefferson Bible. I would make sure that books like that were available, were in the home. I give them copies of great mind power books like It Works, for example. Mm-hmm. Both my kids, I've probably given them multiple copies of It Works. I know that they have used it. So I think it's less what we plan than what we just occupy ourselves with over the hours of the day that kids pick up. Also a very valuable thing, also a very cautionary thing. So I think by osmosis, they kind of pick up what I'm talking about in as much as I'm able to practice it. And I'm a start and stop student myself. I always like to tell people I am a co-seeker. I only speak and write and chronicle as a co-seeker with everybody else. I try to leave in their path books and ideas that relate to the very things that we're talking about. They know who Neville is. They know who Vernon Howard is. They know many of the figures I venerate. They always know that those things are there for them and that you can use Dad's tools. That is one part of the house, so to speak, that's always open. The tool shop is always open. So I try to leave out those tools and they can pick them up as they wish.
Awesome. On the note on picking up tools, where can people go to find out more, to find your work, and find out what you're up to next?
Well, they can always just throw my name into Google, Mitch Horowitz, and it'll take you to my website, mitchhorowitz.com. My email is there. I actually hear from lots of Inspire Nation listeners, and I always love hearing from them. The questions and the observations that your listeners bring to me are always practical and useful and deeply, deeply helpful. They spur me on to my own search. My new book, The Miracle Club, can be pre-ordered on Amazon. It's coming out in the month of October. It's up on Amazon right now. I'm also doing a series called the Masterclass series on the New Thought channel, which is a series of 5 workshops where I delve deeply into some of these ideas. Those can be ordered by DVD, or they can be watched later in the month digitally on the New Thought channel. If you follow me on social media, Twitter or Facebook, you'll get news of all this stuff too.
Excellent. And did you have, we were originally, I love how we were guided today. We were originally going to be talking about the other self, which apparently didn't happen, but you have a class coming up on this from what I understand.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, I have a class coming out on finding your other self. It's an exploration of this idea, which we sometimes think of as fantasy, but I think is actually quite real, that we have another self. There's a fuller, greater, stronger other self, a kind of doppelganger. That's us and not us at the same time that we can invite in. And my class on discovering your other self is coming up. It's a webinar. You can do it right from home on Wednesday, June 13th. And I would invite people to sign up for that. It is a really wild, interesting exploration of this concept of you're having another self, which we take as fantasy, but which I maintain is actually fact. And we're going to explore exactly how to get in touch with that. That's June 13th. You can contact me for details, or you can join me on social media, and you'll find the details.
URL for that again?
You can go to Neuralearning, N-U-R-A, Neuralearning, or you can follow me on Twitter, and you'll find the link. It is a webinar on Wednesday, June 13th. It's a workshop under the title of The Miracle Club, Discovering Your Other Self.
Woohoo! I'll make sure to put that on our website as well.
Thank you.
This has been truly brilliant, Mitch. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
Just that it is always a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always so encouraged by your listeners, because I think that among all the various shows that are out there on self-improvement and self-discovery, my personal observation has been that the people who are watching and listening to Inspire Nation are uniquely driven practical seekers, and that is reinforced whenever I'm on, because I hear from your listeners and I'm always touched by them sharing experiences and by their probing questions. So I think you've really assembled a remarkable community, and I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for everybody. If I could put everybody in my arms, for everybody out there. Thank you so much, Mitch.
Yeah. Thank you.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the Miracle Club, or pre-order it, and begin diving into your own Miracle Club today, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Pleasure, man. Really enjoyed it.
Your interviews are all phenomenal, but this was brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!